All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the final podcast of Black History Month. And we have a few questions that we want to have answered today, but before we dive into those questions, I know that, Paul, you've been up here a couple of times this month, and I think, Pastor Shannon, you've been up here once. This is my second time, and Pastor Jeremy, it's your first time. I don't know what they have against you, but we saved the best for last. And so here's my first question, and it's really not a question that was given to us, but what has this podcast meant to you, doing this from week to week? Yeah, absolutely, man.
I think it's a good opportunity to model having these type of intimate conversations that can get uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for me to, it's been important for me to be able to help model this so that it goes beyond if you click on it and watch it. But you could take this into your everyday life and have this actually be a part of who you are, for this to be a regular practice for you to get around the table and engage in conversations, learning conversations, for you to be able to explore and appreciate the diversity within the body of Christ. And it just so happens to be that this is Black History Month, so we are appreciating and honoring Black life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why it's been important for me.
And I think it's important for anyone who calls themselves a Christ follower to be able, maybe this challenges them to get out of their comfort zone because they're dealing with some biases or maybe even racism. And it challenges them to invite a friend or a coworker or neighbor to have coffee or lunch and be able to hear someone else's story from the other side of the table. And so for me, that's been my prayer over these last several weeks, is that people in our church and other churches would be challenged by that. How about you, Pastor Shannon?
I think for me, having these conversations has been such that we could model that when we come to the table, perhaps we do have more in common than we think. And many times we set up our walls ahead of time, but when we sit at the table like we're doing right now and we just get to know each other, we really do have more common ground than many times we realize. And I think that is something that's really touched me through this.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so let's jump into the first question, and we're going to have you, Pastor Jeremy, answer the question, and then we'll kind of go around the table. So Pastor Jeremy, then Pastor Paul, and then you, Pastor Shannon, all will answer this question. So how has racism affected your life in specific ways?
I would say it has affected my life in a lot of different ways. Unfortunately, most negative ways. It is difficult and hard to stomach sometimes that in most rooms or most situations as a Black man, that the odds are stacked against you. And I think for me, growing up, that has always been my hardest thing to deal with when it comes to racism. I grew up predominantly right here in the Yulee, Florida area, so I was always in classrooms where I was the only Black guy. I was always in situations where I was the only Black person, and it was hard to always feel like I was accepted, and to not feel like that I had to work twice as hard and do and make twice the better moves, or whatever you want to look at it, in order to succeed. Being a Black man, it has had its times where it put me in situations where it was dangerous. I mean, you can, from being stopped by police officers to altercations with the other race that I didn't particularly pick the fight, if you will. Just a lot of things that I've ran into in my life. I don't want to get all into it, but a lot of things I've ran into in my life that I feel like it stems from racism. It stems from people, from their thoughts and how they've been raised and how they view people who look like me, who dress like me, who shares my cultural likeness. So I just feel we have, or I have, should I say, been affected by it in a lot of negative ways that I did not necessarily. You know, a lot of times, I'll say it to you like this. A lot of times when things affect us, a lot of times we play a part in it affecting us the way that it does. But with this particular subject in my life, I can honestly say that most of the time when I was in really bad situations, it was just because of who I was versus what I said or what I did. And that has always been the disheartening thing to me. That in a lot of those situations, because of what I looked like, I wasn't given the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, that's how it has affected me. Now, if you flip the coin, I feel like the positive effects that it had was like what we're doing right now, having these conversations and being able to sit across the table from someone who doesn't look like you and hear their thoughts, like you said, and to be able to find out that we do have more in common than what we ever thought.
Right.
But because of the way society has built things and the way even our families have taught us, it was always hard for us to look past all of that, because everything was built on judging each other for something as simple as the color of your skin.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Pastor Paul?
Thanks, Pastor Jeremy. For me, it's affected me in a lot of ways too, but I'm going to focus on more recent, so within the last 3 to 5 years, probably specifically starting with murder of George Floyd, right, when social unrest around the racial climate in our country just got really hot. I started to recognize a lot of racism within the church. I've experienced racism outside of the church my entire life. Similarly, I grew up in inner city Philadelphia for like elementary years, and we moved to the suburbs where we were the only black family. So I'm used to navigating majority white spaces, but when it comes to church hurt, I feel like that's a little different, right? So I was just at a coffee shop this morning, and I was talking with another pastor, and he was at a retreat, and they were talking about talking with some black members in the community, and this is the part that hurts. They said that, man, I don't even feel like church is for black people, because many of the mainstream churches that are in the city where they're at, when they walk in, it doesn't speak to your experience. Even when it's multi-ethnic, multiracial, it's monocultural. So you're a black face in a sea of European, Western Christianity that doesn't really translate to your life experience. So I say that because there's another church I was a part of where there's this guy who was on staff and went through a whole bunch of racial microaggressions and blatant stuff, and long story short, he not only left the church, he left the faith. Right? Google God, Google Jesus, and until recently, scroll down the images, and most likely it's a portrayal of a white man as Jesus or God, like I said, as until recently. So if you're a black person and all these images, all this art, all these expressions of who God is a white person. And the only time we see black people, they're in chains or they're in bondage, or, you know, as great as it is to try to help people who are in impoverished nations and stuff, it's always a malnourished black kid that, you know, white people are coming, hey, let's give you the gospel, let's help you. If black people are always in a position on the margins, and God only works through white people or Europeans, right? Because we look at all the theologians a lot of people quote, right? It's the Martin Luthers, it's the John Calvins, it's all these white folks, right? Which is great. They have great contributions to the body, but it's not just them, right? There's a rich history in Africa and Asia, but we don't talk about that. So if the masses of black and brown people see that God only works through white people, and we're always on the margins or oppressed, he doesn't love us. He doesn't work through us. Why would I want to serve that God? So when I see black people leaving the faith because of racism, and I have family members who have too, and have turned to Dr. Eric Mason, I believe he calls it the black religious identity cults, right? Where they're speaking to something that's missing, right? There's these different religions or belief systems that speak to your black identity, but they're missing the gospel aspect, right? But the fact that in mainstream Christianity, there's been a void that ignores or neglects our blackness, people are leaving the faith for something that they can identify with. And that breaks my heart. That's how racism has affected me recently, to the point where it's messed me up, to the point where now I've gone to the other side where I'm trying to defend or justify our existence, and I shouldn't have to do that either, right? I shouldn't have to go spitting all these facts and trying to educate people that, hey, no, we did this and we were here and we did, no. God has given us our dignity and value, and I don't have to justify that for you to look at me and value my humanity. So that's how racism has affected me as of recent.
And do you think that that creates a different lens that you see everything else? And I know that wasn't part of the question, but
clarify that a little bit. Different,
you know,
like
when
that experience.
Anytime we experience pain or hurt, no matter what it is, a lot of times we'll see everything through that lens. And so, you know, you said recently, and so, you know, we want to be real and raw.
Right.
You know, we're not here to play games and gimmicks, and because this is hard, it's difficult, and you guys understand it on a much different level than I ever will.
Yeah.
And so, as your friend and as your pastor, you know, that hurts, because when you hurt, I hurt. And so, it was just a question that popped in my mind.
I'll speak to that, and I think what you just said is great, because you said when I hurt, you hurt. So I think because that didn't necessarily happen to me. It happened to another black person that I know, right? I did experience some of that later, where because I took stands, people distanced themselves from me, and tried to question my Christianity, and if I really do believe, if I'm for these things or whatever. But I saw another person, another black person who was hurting from racism, and their hurt me. So what I think it did is it opened my eyes to that, and not only racism, but just my eyes being more aware for people on the margins in general, people who are overlooked, people whose dignity is denied because of folks in power. Everybody has power because God gives us power too. So what are we going to, power in itself is not bad, it's neutral. That's what you do with it, right? So it just has helped me to have a keen eye for those on the margins. So for the people that we typically walk by or don't consider their voice in a situation, those are the people that I especially see.
Yeah. So it's giving you a different lens to see people that normal people don't see.
Right.
Because we're in such a hurry, right? We have our group of people that we connect with, and Pastor Shannon?
So I think I want to speak to this maybe from a couple of different perspectives. One recently is kind of the obvious experiences that may be common to people of color. You know, riding in the car with my daughter and having someone come up to my open window and call me the N-word, coming out of the grocery store and having an older white woman come up to my kids and offer them bananas, says to say they're monkeys. And like, you think of that, and the initial thing is like, this is still happening like now?
Right.
But strangely, those are not the things that scare me because they're obvious. To me, the other layer to it is sometimes my experience has been the assumption of my ignorance. And what I mean by that is I had gotten a job promotion when I was working in the secular world. And the first day I showed up in a suit and a tie. And a woman comes up to me and says, "Are you our new security guard?" Nothing wrong with security at all, but my response was, "No, I'm your boss." And so there's an assumption that many times I have to prove just based on my color, that I can only get to a certain place. And that's just one example of many. And you hear, like, to me, we all know how atrocious it is for people to hurl racial slurs, and we've all felt the hurt of it as people of color. But to me, what hurts more is the fact that sometimes people come up to me and they say, "You know what, you're really articulate." And to me, it's almost a backhanded insult, because the assumption is that I wouldn't be.
Right.
You know, and so when I say to someone, you know, if you got to know me, you'd know I have 5 advanced degrees. You know, but the assumption is that someone who looks like me can only reach a certain level of accomplishment, and that hurts. That hurts.
Yeah. Wow. All right, so to kind of stay in the vein of what we just talked about, let's bring it closer to home. And so we know that for the last 5 years, we've been fighting to be a church that looks like heaven. And we've lost a lot of people. I've lost close friends, people that I thought were close, that left because of the very vision of becoming a church that looks like heaven. And again, I've experienced pain from that, but at the same time, I know the vision is greater. And I can't imagine now, in 2024, not sitting around a table with you guys, and the friendships that have been built is so much richer. And I know that we have so much further to go as a church, because I feel like sometimes we still have a group of people who are with us, but maybe they tolerate the vision. Like, I'm not fully bought in, even though it's biblical and it's who God's called us to be. And this is what my church is supposed to look like on earth. And so, you Jeremy, you've been in it longer here, but maybe you guys could speak into kind of what you've experienced here at the Journey. And I know that wasn't part of our questions, but I just felt like, based on, you know, some of your answers from the last question, that we could kind of step into where we are, you know.
It was it was kind of a racial roller coaster for me when I got here. Because when I got here, I've been here for 5 years, so I pretty much came at the very beginning of the transition of making a church that looks like heaven. I remember that was what you told me the day we first met. You told me the whole story about how you went to the conference and God pricked your heart, and this was the mission. And then I've been here and I've experienced seeing people and not seeing them anymore, and finding out that that played a huge part in why they're not here. My very first Sunday here, was standing out in the foyer, having a conversation with, of course, somebody I didn't know because it was my very first Sunday, and I know that she didn't really mean any harm, but she was telling me a story. She asked me, did I know a certain person from this community, a black lady, and I was like, yeah, I'm very familiar with her. And she told me, yeah, we were great friends growing up in high school. We were so cool. And she was like, I hung around all of the black people, and they used to call me the white N-word. And she said it to me, the white N-word. And that was my very first Sunday here. So, of course, as soon as she said it to me, I didn't even respond. I literally just walked away. I went straight to the executive lounge. And but literally on my way to the executive lounge, all I could think to myself is, God, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing here? But one thing I can say is that coming to this place, to this church, has changed my life in so many ways. But in the context of what we're talking about right now, it allowed me to not only, of course, see what I've been seeing my whole life from this side of the table, but it also gave me an opportunity to see what white people have been seeing from their side of the table. And it opened up a level of accountability even to me that I didn't have. Because whether we want to admit it or not, racism is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. And we have, even as black people, we have our fault in it as well, if you will. I know we can dig deeper into that, but just generally speaking, we have our issues as well. And in the race and gospel class, the race and the gospel class that we walked through, that we had an opportunity, me and my wife had an opportunity to lead. It was challenging, and it caused us to not only see what we were dealing with as far as being at a predominantly white church at the time and all of that, but it also held us accountable as well, because there were some feelings that we had to address, and we had to ask God to help us with it, because it was wrong to feel this way and to have these thoughts, and but still call yourself a Christian, still call yourself a believer. So just as much as we were standing in front of everybody, trying to help them see their wrong, it was exposing our wrong as well. So it was just an eye-opener. Being in this church has been a very huge eye-opener for not just us to have the conversation, and for, especially, from a black person standpoint, for white people to see how wrong they've wronged us. But it also gave me an opportunity to see I'm wrong too. The way I feel is not great either. And I have some things that I need to talk about, that I need to address, that I need God's help with. Because just like a lot of white people grow up in homes where they're taught to feel that way about black people are brought up in homes where they're taught to feel the way that they feel about white people. And it's all wrong. It's either I know some black people can feel more justified in it because we are the oppressed, if you will. But if we're all loving God and following God, it's all wrong. And we all have a part to play in this reconciliation process. So that's what it did. It opened my eyes and let me know that you have a part to play in this. Yeah. That you need help as well. Not just the people you're talking to.
Right.
So, yeah.
And you've played a huge part. And I don't even have the vocabulary to tell you how grateful I am for you and your family. We just love you guys so much, and I have no doubt that meeting in the lobby, that Pastor Mark sent you to us, was God ordained. 100%. And so incredible. And then Pastor Shannon, we met at United together at Pastor Adams' church, and I mean, I hadn't even made it off the stage, man, and you were there waiting for me, and it was like instant friendship and connection, and you know, it took a couple of years and some different things that God had to do to get you here, but man, we're so grateful for you as well. Can you speak into that as well?
Absolutely. I remember that night because you were coming off the stage, and I had whispered to my wife, I said, I heard your heart and your vision. I said, I have to meet him. And I think it wasn't a couple of weeks after that, we were having lunch and developing a friendship. But I think the most profound thing to me, being a part of the journey, and is you've never treated me like less than. You've spoken into the things that God has been doing in my life and the life of my family, and I think that that is something that I've led in the secular world. I've led in the Christian world, and I know what it's like to be the token. And you've never treated me like that. The church has not treated me like that. I've always, what God has given you and Kara to do is difficult. It is extremely difficult. It's not the norm. I think fellas would agree that what happens here is not, it's not normal. And it really just touches my heart, because when someone entrusts you to demonstrate real leadership, and not leadership that's just in a title or a position that outwardly looks a certain way to somebody else, it makes a difference. And so, like you said, I don't believe our church will ever act as if we've arrived, but I think that what happens here is authentic. I know it is. And you can just walk around our campus and see that. Of course, we have work to do.
Yeah.
But what is happening is real. It's not cosmetic, and I think that is what really sticks out to me.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's 100% real. I really feel like we have a huge group of people who believe in what we're trying to accomplish, what God can only accomplish through us. We know that. But of course, it doesn't matter what church you're a part of and what vision that you have for that church. You're always going to have some people on the outside, right, who are tolerating any part of your vision, because we know that God is the only one that can change a heart, right? He can be the only one that can, take someone, who hates someone because of the color of their skin and transform that, reconcile that. We can't do that. Now, God could use our conversations. God can use our stories. But at the end of the day, it has to be a God thing. It has to be transformation. And so we met, again, through Pastor Mark. And so, Pastor Mark, if you're watching, like, bro, you have been a huge part of this vision. You are a friend, and you are a mentor. You are one of our overseers, as well as Pastor Shannon. And what you've done to help us become what God is doing here is impeccable. It's just incredible. And so we were at a place where we were hiring someone again, and of course, Pastor Mark's that first one I'm calling, and at that time we had our West Campus, and we were doing the Race in the Gospel.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Mark was coming over to help teach that. And I had reached out to him, and he said, I'm actually bringing a guy with me tonight. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of how it began.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again, Pastor Mark, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that
There goes
connection.
Pastor Mark.
Yeah. And he's been instrumental in helping me find my voice in all of this, because, like I said, I was at a church before this that was predominantly white that doesn't take this stand. And that's their choice. That's between them and God, right? But that's where it had me questioning, what does God want to do with me, right? Because I'm wired that way to see the people on the margins. So when we did the My Story sermon series, I talked about this at the West Campus. I was ready to, I don't know if I would say quit on God, because I think I've seen too much to quit on God, but I was like, man, I don't feel like doing this anymore. So like, I wouldn't say I don't believe in him, but I was just disengaged. And then Pastor Mark hit me up and said, hey, I want you to come out here and help teach this class, right? And then I went out, and I hadn't seen a predominantly white church address that, right? And just what happened in that room was powerful, and I could start being more of myself in these public spaces. So it's been incredible to see the progress since when I first got here, this is going on my 3rd year. One of the things that I have to navigate in these type of conversations and just helping people to see, acknowledge, affirm the image of God on everyone. I'm going to use 2 metaphors, right? When it comes to conversations around race and honoring that image of God, a lot of times, in especially large, predominantly white institutions, they liken it to the Titanic, right? And they say, hey man, you can't turn the Titanic overnight. It's a slow turn. This is a big ship. This is a big movement, right? And I always had a problem with that because I'm like, man, how I know you can't do an abrupt turn. You're going to destroy everybody, right? But what's the difference between like a slow turn and no turn? Because it always felt like there was like no progress, right? But you got to realize that when you're leading people, you can't lead them at breakneck speed, or you look back and there's not going to be anybody there. So you got to meet them where they are, right? But with that metaphor with the Titanic, a mentor of mine helped me and said, hey, when people say that, do they realize that because the Titanic couldn't turn, it crashed into an iceberg and there were mass casualties? Not good imagery. Don't compare what you're trying to do to the Titanic. The Titanic ended in doom, right? So we have to continue to progress, right? So a better image is breaking the sound barrier, right? They said that, I forgot the pilot's name, but the person who broke the sound barrier, there were many pilots before him that tried to. But as you're approaching the speed of sound, there's an intense shaking, right? There's turbulence like crazy, and people would decelerate. Like, man, this is too scary. I got to back out. What does that sound like? People who might want to take a step into this journey.
Right.
You make that stance, and then you start having people leave your church, and you have people start questioning your fidelity to the gospel. And oh no, let me drop that. I'm not doing that, right? So people stop before they break the sound barrier. But if you push through that turbulence, if you push through the intense shaking, the criticisms and all that, while maintaining your allegiance to Christ and the vision that He's given you, on the other side of all of that shaking, there's something beautiful, right? So there's this fine line where you have to continue to progress, right? But you also have to do it in a way where you're maintaining the people you have with you, right? So that's one of the things that I've seen and been navigating here and in other spaces where I'm trying this work as well, is to make sure that, yes, we continue to progress. No, it can't be so slow that you look around and, man, is there anything different? But you also can't go at breakneck speed to where you turn around, there's nobody left behind you.
That's good. Well, I think we're over time, but why don't you, Pastor Shannon, kind of tie a bow on everything and maybe challenge us, like what can we continue to do as a church, right? Because as a church, you've got people who've been here. We've got people that's been here since Pastor Jeremy came on. We've got people here, since Paul came on, but there's always new people coming, right? And so, what's that fine line between, keeping that vision out in front of the people? Because, anytime you do that, it's like pruning. Not just numerically, but financially. Right. And so every time you have one of those really hard, difficult conversations, and we're always celebrating what God's doing. And again, I don't mind pruning because we know biblically that, everything is not always have to multiply to grow. Sometimes growth happens by subtraction because we get the foundation that God wants. But kind of speak into, what that could look like for us individually and as a church moving forward.
These conversations have been amazing. I think that two things come to mind. I think that we have to be a people that are willing to, you taught our entire church body on Pride a couple of weeks ago. I think that we have to be people that are willing as Christians to walk in humility, first of all, to be teachable, that I don't know everything as a black man, nor do you know everything as a white man, but we can learn from each other, that we all bring something to the table, so to really embrace a humility that says everything does not have to be my way, but together we can be who God created us and called us to be. As a church,
Right.
Locking arms together. Humility is the first thing. Second thing, in tying all together, I would say we have to walk in courage. And we have to walk in courage because, as you said, this being a church that looks like heaven, that functions like heaven, there's a price to that.
Exactly.
Jeremy's our worship pastor, but he doesn't just get the sings and pick songs that he likes to sing. You're our lead pastor, but you have to speak to everybody, and I believe that God gives you to do that. And all of us, whether we're on serve teams, whether part of the body of Christ, have to understand it's not just us.
Mm-hmm.
And to remember, what Christ has done, he's done for all of us. And if he says we're part of a family, then the collective family has to be willing to be humble, to walk in humility, to walk in courage. And then the last thing is to guard our hearts against offense. Because this topic, it is so easy on whatever side you sit to be offended quickly. And then all of a sudden, none of us want resolution on anything because we've been bruised
Right.
at the heart. There's things that you've said and done in my life that have brought healing to hurts that I've had before and offenses that I've had before. But had that not happened, I'd be filtering everything through, my hurt, which is not, that's part of life. So courage, humility, and guarding against offense, Pastor, I would say is the most important thing.
Wow. Well, let's do this. Thank you for joining us for this last podcast. Just because it's the end of February, it doesn't mean we stop celebrating. And so, Pastor Jeremy, why don't you close us in prayer?
Absolutely. Father God, we love you, and we thank you for this space that you have given us, God, to have these conversations that a lot of us run away from. God, I thank you for allowing us to begin the process of reconciliation, God. I thank you for being a part of a church that desires to be a church that looks like heaven. Now, God, I pray that you continue to equip us, God, with the knowledge and the courage to continue this journey. As we stated, there's a price to pay. I thank God that we have not wavered because of that price. We have lost people who we love. We have seen people walk away who we did not want to see walk away. But God, we stay true to your vision and what you have called us to do and to be. Because we believe in what you say. We believe in who you are. And we believe that you have designed us to be a church that looks like heaven. So God, now I pray for the hearts and minds of your people. A lot of us walk in and out of this building every single week, and we love each other, God, but we all still have issues as it pertains to this subject. Let us not push those up under the rug. Let us not ignore them, God, but continue to have us to create spaces like this, to talk and to hear one another, and not just hear what one another is saying, but to hear their heart, God. Allow us to be able to love each other in spite of, to be able to care for each other in spite of, God. In spite of our differences, in spite of the things that we may not see eye to eye on, God, one thing that we do see, the same. Is your love, your grace, your mercy that you have for us, God. We are your people, God. So, God, I pray right now, even for the leadership at this church, God. Continue to have them to walk in the spirit of boldness. God, continue to give them the right words to say, the right moments to create, God, to continue to push this agenda, God. And I pray, God, against any attack of the enemy. Mm-hmm. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. What we're doing right now, he does not like this. Mm-hmm. That's right. What this church stands for, he does not like this. Mm-hmm. But God, we know that it's in you we live, we move, and we have our being. So God, I pray, God, that you just continue to use us for your glory, continue to give us what we need to be what you've called us to be in this space, God. And God, and just allow for your kingdom to be glorified through all of this, God. More importantly, God, we just want you to get the glory. We want everything that we say and everything that we do to bring glory to you, Jesus. So get the glory out of this, God. Allow this to just continue to be a springboard and a catalyst to draw people to you, God. Not just to this church, but to you, God. We want people to have relationship with you. I pray, God, that you bless this church to continue to be the church that is able to steward all types of people who walk through the door, God, no matter what their background is, God. God, give us the strength, give us the wisdom to steward these people correctly so we can do nothing but point them back to the very feet of you, God. We thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.